What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Tattoo Critiques. This is the place where you send in your tattoos and I break them down, hopefully giving you some tips or tricks that you can implement into your own work. This week we're going back into apprentice tattoos, where there's usually a lot to learn, so let's not waste any more time and get right to it. Alright, the first tattoo sent in is from Apprentice Luke P. And Luke, you sent in this Mario Kart turtle shell. You mentioned that this is only your 5th tattoo, your 2nd containing color. Luke, you also said in your email that you decided to use only cool tones in the rainbow coming down from the shell, as you thought it would have a nice contrast with that red. However, I don't think it's really doing what you expected. To me, it kind of just looks like a green and blue smear. Had you had all those rainbow colors in there, this thing would have had a load of contrast. This tattoo does have a lot of saturation, but I do think it's almost too much saturation, because if you look down at that rainbow, you can tell that skin is no longer smooth. To me, it looks like it might not have the easiest heal, especially on those two sides. It may even end up scarring or losing a bit of color. The lines aren't the cleanest either, but since this is your 5th tattoo, that's to be expected. Although those lines are a little shaky, it does look like you have a good hand movement going on. Another thing to keep in mind is your portfolio is what sells your work, so you want to make sure that these pictures are as clean as possible. Get rid of all that extra juice on that tattoo and make sure that you can actually see what's underneath all that wetness. I'd be curious if you had those cool tones on your design before putting it on skin. Something you could have done is made another design with those actual rainbow colors and compare and contrast them and see what you like better. Because I bet you would have ended up picking that one with the actual rainbow design over this one. Sometimes it's nice to go through your designs and see what you like or don't like before actually applying it to skin. So keep it up, Luke, and thank you so much for sending that in. Alright, the next apprentice up is Anthony Adkins. And Anthony, you sent in this black and white rooster tattoo. You mentioned that you've only been on skin for 3 weeks and this is technically your 3rd tattoo. Now this goes to show you that you can still have a pretty simple design but still look clean. Now this isn't an amazing tattoo, but it's still pretty impressive for being only your 3rd. And not to mention, this is exactly what you should be working on during this time of your apprenticeship. You also said in the email that this is your first time shading. And it's really not that bad. There's only a couple spots that I see that aren't that consistent. I think the most consistent part of the shading on this tattoo is that lower right half. But if you bring your eyes to the left part of that, it does get a little bit choppy underneath his gobbler. Now, obviously, I think the most important part about this tattoo is the outline, and it's pretty damn good. There's really not any bad lines in this entire thing. And as we discussed in an episode not too long ago, these points on this tattoo can be rather tricky. There is lots of room for mistakes, but you seem to handle it pretty well. If I was nitpicking, I'd say the only point that got away from you is that very bottom one. But it's really not that bad. I think the most difficult point on this tattoo is its beak, and you nailed it. Although this isn't the most complicated design, there are a lot of good techniques packed into this tattoo. I think you're right in your lane. This is right where you need to be. So keep it up, and thank you so much, Anthony, for sending that in. Alright, next apprentice up is Matthias. And Matthias, you sent in a few tattoos, but we're gonna take a look at this little orange hot pepper. Matthias, I think the color that you chose for this design is great. However, when it comes to the application, I think you kind of just fell short. The first thing I would have done with this tattoo is thrown a nice fat black outline all the way around it. It would have made those oranges pop way more than they already do. Now, I know apprentices can be scared of black sometimes, but you gotta get used to it. If you're gonna do color like this, black is gonna be your best friend. I would have also liked to see some black in that orange. I noticed you do have some in the green, but it just doesn't have that contrast like it should. The blue in the background is a little weak. I think it just falls short. It's really not doing this tattoo any favors. And those lines just aren't symmetrical. If you were to draw a line from each of the blue line into the center of the pepper, they would all meet at a different spot. Orange and blue are contrasting colors, and they generally look good together, but it just seems out of place here. I think this tattoo would have been bold enough without it. If you wanted to use blue in this tattoo, you could have probably given it a glow on the bottom or sides. It would have kept that contrast and given it a nice dimension. Now, I myself struggle with those olive green type colors. So when it comes to the stem, I probably would have used a brown to a dark green to a lighter green or a yellow and stayed away from that olive because it's not really giving it any punch. Again, having a nice fat black outline around this tattoo probably would have done it justice. The placement of the white is okay, but again, that white really isn't that strong. If you're gonna use a white like this in a tattoo, it's gotta be bold and thick. So Matthias, really not a bad job with this tattoo, just some minor tweaks here and there, and I really think this will help your color tattoos in the long run. Alright, next tattoo up is sent in from Nathaniel Chitwood. And Nathaniel, you sent in this cute little frog wizard. Once again, I think this is exactly what an apprentice should be working on. The techniques used in a design like this is only going to help you in the future. And although this isn't the most complicated design, I do think everything in this tattoo is executed very well. The outlines in this tattoo show me that you have control, because some of these outlines are super long, and those are the more difficult ones to navigate, and I can't really tell where you started or stopped. So excellent job there. And again, when we go back to the points, there are so many sharp points in this tattoo, so many opportunities for mistakes, but you nailed it. And we've talked about this before. You have to get those points just right, otherwise they're gonna stick out like a sore thumb. When I'm critiquing a tattoo, it doesn't matter what tattoo it is. I'm looking at how clean the lines are and how consistent the shading is. And this tattoo, although it may not have a lot of shading, the shading that is there is very consistent. Along the legs and his back, if you look closely, it's just a nice smooth gradient all the way through. When we go up to that tomato, you've got a nice bold outline around the tomato itself, and you've got a thinner line weight around the green part of that tomato, just giving it a little bit of dimension. Had you had a thicker outline around that green part, I don't think it would have looked as good. If you choose me, feel free to put me in a non-apprentice episode if you want, as I feel my work is strong enough to compete with people way more experienced than me. I think that's a very bold thing to say, Nathaniel. Cocky little bitch. So I didn't read that part of the email at first. And Nathaniel, if I had to give you any sort of critique, it would be to humble yourself. You do realize that you're putting yourself up against people who have been tattooing for 20 plus years and who would smoke this frog. That being said, I do think this is a great apprentice tattoo, and I think you're right where you need to be. Keep doing designs like this. Keep pushing yourself and perfecting those little techniques so you can compete with those artists with more experience. Nonetheless, good work, Nathaniel, and thank you so much for sending that in. All right, next apprentice up is Lewis Cortez, and Lewis, you sent in this Japanese manga horror tattoo. Right off the bat, I think this thing has a great composition. It fits the leg well. It's nice and big up top, and it kind of tapers down with the ankle. It almost feels like she's ripping out of that tendon. A lot of times we don't see attention to composition when it comes to apprentice tattoos, so it's really nice to see this work so well on the body. Now, aside from the composition, I think this tattoo has some really nice elements to it as well. The cherry blossoms are a nice touch, and I think you did a good job with the saturation. I think cherry blossoms are a great thing to work on as an apprentice because they're not overly complicated, but you can mess them up pretty easily. So to all apprentices out there, I think this is definitely something that you could be working on because it requires a lot of discipline and it can really refine your skills. I noticed the characters at the top aren't super saturated, but they are nice and bold, and they do bring a lot of attention to this piece. The white around the characters also give it a nice glow and keep it separate from her hair. Speaking of hair, I do think you did a good job with that, as it's nice and tight at the top and kind of becomes more loose at the bottom, just making it feel more natural. And I think the one thing that I love most about this tattoo isn't that big, but it is those eyes. Those eyes are menacing. I do think this is a great tattoo. There are just a couple parts that aren't as tight as they should be. The outline coming down from the bottom of the bow, a few pieces of the hair, and again that red saturation at the top just isn't quite 100%. I do notice the little bit of red in the bow, so it kind of seems like maybe those shades got a little overworked, but it's really not that bad overall. But coming from an apprentice, I do think you're on the right track, and I look forward to seeing your stuff in the future. So thank you so much for sending that in. All right, let's get to my favorite tattoo of the episode, which was sent in by Nathaniel with this little wizard frog. All right, Ryan obviously disagrees with me, and I know a lot of you will probably disagree with me as well. Nathaniel, you almost lost it in the email. Cocky little bitch. However, when I'm looking at critiquing a tattoo, I'm looking at fundamental skills. And this tattoo in particular seemed to rise above all the others. This tattoo might not have all the bells and whistles, but it does have those fundamental skills that I'm talking about. Solid line weight, consistent shading, and a design that's not going to overwhelm you. Another reason I picked this tattoo is I don't want apprentices biting off more than they can chew, doing these really large tattoos when they don't have those fundamental skills down packed. I did enjoy the Japanese manga tattoo. I just thought there were a few too many inconsistencies compared to this tattoo. But congratulations, Nathaniel, on being my favorite this week. And what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Did I get it wrong?
Yes.
All right, now for my favorite part of the series is sharing with you guys a tattooer who I think you should all be following, who is William Taylor Barbour-Brown III out of Brighton, England. When it comes to color saturation, you really can't get much better. This guy kills it. I try to make my featured artist somebody that goes along with what we've talked about during this episode. His lines are impeccable. The color is packed perfectly, and the designs themselves are stupendous. And his work has all the right elements in which I think an apprentice should be striving for. So do yourself a favor, head on over to his page, give him a follow, and let him know I sent you. And if you guys would like to see your tattoos critiqued on this channel, you can do so by sending them to ponycritiques@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe while you're here, and as always, I will see you all next week.